Oh, and do subscribe to Husbandry before we begin, because honestly, this is one of those ideas that sounds a bit counterintuitive until you realize it has quietly governed successful food systems for thousands of years. The secret to pest-free, self-sustaining gardens is not, tighter control, stronger sprays or cleaner beds. It lives at the edges, in the spaces most gardeners trim, mow or erase. Rewilding those edges changes everything, and, well, history certainly proves it. Why the edges have always mattered more than the centre. In nature, the most productive zones are not forests, fields or wetlands by themselves, but the boundaries where they meet. These transition zones, known historically as margins, supported more species, more predators, and more stability than any uniform area. Early farmers noticed this long before ecology even had a name. Crops near hedgerows suffered fewer pest outbreaks. Fields bordered by scrub and woodland rebounded faster after drought and disease. Edges act as buffers. They slow wind, trap moisture, harbour predators, and interrupt pest movement. When modern gardens erase edges in favour of clean lines and open exposure, they remove the very systems that kept pests in check. So, you see, modern gardening has, quite unintentionally, created perfect highways for pests. Bare soil, straight rows and sharp boundaries, well, they're really efficient for machines, but not for ecosystems. In these simplified spaces, pests can move freely from plant to plant, facing almost no resistance at all. There are, honestly, very few hiding places left for predators, and no alternative food sources to keep them around throughout the year. Historically, this kind of openness in the landscape was actually quite rare. Even in intensively farmed landscapes of the past, there were ditches, hedges, stone walls, unmanaged corners, and fallow strips. These weren't just wasted spaces. They were, in fact, a form of insurance. So, what rewilding the edges actually means in practical terms is, well, it's not about abandoning control or just letting our gardens collapse into chaos. Instead, it means we're deliberately allowing complexity, but only where it does the most good. You see, edges are ideal because they influence the entire system, all without competing directly with our crops. And honestly, this can be as simple as just letting native grasses, flowering weeds and shrubs grow along fences, paths and bed borders. The goal here is continuity, not just height or density alone. A living edge, really, should provide shelter, nectar and cover across all the seasons. That's actually why predators tend to live at the edges and then hunt in the garden itself. Most beneficial predators do not live in crop beds. They hunt there, but they reproduce over winter and shelter elsewhere. Beetles, spiders, parasitic wasps, birds and small reptiles all rely on undisturbed habitat. When edges are rewilded, these predators establish permanent populations. Pests become occasional meals instead of explosive infestations. This is why historic gardens often needed no pest control beyond observation. How traditional farming systems preserved wild margins on purpose. Medieval hedgerows were not decorative. They were carefully managed ecosystems. Farmers coppiced shrubs, layered branches, and encourage thorny growth to shelter livestock and wildlife alike. These hedges reduced insect pressure and protected crops from wind and frost. But, indigenous agricultural systems went even further. Food forests blurred the line between wild and cultivated entirely. The edge was everywhere, and pest outbreaks were rare because, no single species ever dominated. So, how do you start rewilding garden edges without losing productivity? Begin by identifying non-productive boundaries. Things like fence lines, corners, drainage paths, and the outer edges of beds are ideal. Simply stop mowing or clearing these areas and allow plants to return naturally for one season. Observe which species appear, and you'll often find that many so-called weeds are actually powerful insectaries. Flowering plants with small clustered blooms, they support beneficial insects far better than most ornamental varieties. Once these plants are established, it's best to thin selectively rather than clearing completely. Let's talk about how rewilded edges can reduce pests without the need for chemicals. Pest insects, they really do rely on predictability. When host plants are isolated in open beds, pests can find them quite easily. But rewilded edges break up those visual and scent cues, forcing pests to work harder, while at the same time predators gain the upper hand. For example, aphids can multiply rapidly in exposed gardens. But in gardens with rewilded margins, lady beetles and lacewings tend to remain present year-round. So aphid populations might rise briefly, and then, quite naturally, they collapse without any intervention. So, why do rewilded edges improve soil and water resilience as well? Well, edges have this remarkable ability to slow down runoff and trap organic matter. Leaf litter tends to accumulate there, feeding the soil life beneath. And, moisture actually lingers longer during those dry periods. Over time, fertility sort of migrates inward from the margins, gradually enriching the whole area. Historically, fields right next to hedges have consistently outperformed those that were fully exposed, even when managed in exactly the same way. The difference, interestingly, wasn't down to fertilizer. It was really all about microclimate and biology. Now, let's talk about how this approach supports long-term self-sufficiency. A garden that relies on sprays, traps, or constant intervention is actually quite fragile. Just one missed season can undo years of hard work. But a garden that's supported by living edges, it tends to correct itself, doesn't it? In survival contexts, this matters. Systems that regulate pests biologically continue functioning when supplies run out. This is why rewilding is not nostalgia. It is strategy. What to expect during the transition phase? The first season may feel unsettling. Insects increase before predators catch up. Growth looks less tidy. This is normal. By the second season, balance begins to emerge. By the third, intervention drops dramatically. History shows that stability favors patience, not force. Subscribe to Husbandry if you value land knowledge that has kept food systems alive through collapse and recovery, and share this guide with anyone fighting pests year after year. The solution is not at the center of the garden. It's waiting at the edges.